we are continuing our series of postmortems, taking a look at the 12 FBS teams across the state of Texas. Of course, you guys are also doing big-time work on the Republic of Football podcast, right?
We are. We had Sonny Dykes on yesterday. You can find that on the Spotifys and wherever else you listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Dana Holgerson next week.
Ooh,
a little bit of breaking news.
Wow, how about that? We're breaking news here on Texas Football Today.
Somebody's got to.
We're taking a look at the Houston Cougars, and we'll start just with a positioning statement. Is Houston the most pleasant surprise in the FBS ranks in 2021?
Yeah, if we're talking state of Texas, I think you have to say, Baylor winning the Big 12 in a Sugar Bowl was pretty big. UTSA winning their first conference championship was pretty big. UTEP making a bowl game was pretty big. I think Houston's right there in that conversation, especially, they lost week 1 to Texas Tech after being up 21-0 in the first half, and it was like, okay, how good is this team? Clayton Tune throws 4 interceptions, and it's like, man, SMU is going to be the team in the American to really watch inside the state. And then they rip off 11 in a row. Clayton Tune takes a huge step forward. The defense was really good. And so, yeah, I mean, they're one of the more fun teams to watch because they're a complete football team. The offense was explosive. The defense made a lot of plays. And then you had Marcus Jones returning 4 kicks for touchdowns. So just a really fun team to watch and enjoyed kind of that season. And we're starting to see Dana Holgerson's vision of what this football team is going to be, and they just got to take that next step with the Big 12 kind of on the doorstep.
Yeah, I think that you go back to week 1 and think about.
You were ready to ride them
we
off.
Talked about
yeah.
We've talked about going into that game about how for both Tech and Houston, boy, it felt like a real, a real big time question of does the loser of this game keep their job? And sure enough, the loser of this game had the best year in a long time there at his program, and the winner of that game is out the door.
We should have pulled a clip from those shows.
Oh, my gosh.
It's another Dana thing. He's not going to last half the season.
An all-time anxiety bowl there between Houston and Tech. Tech gets the win, and you're thinking, boy, is this it for Dana? Like, how's he going to pull this out of the mud? And I think his ability and that staff's ability to not let that one game just dictate the rest of the season is super impressive to me.
Yeah, for me, 2 points were made after that game. One, I mean, week 1 is a crapshoot. We got in college football, maybe in high school as well. You just can't take week 1 all that seriously because there's no preseason. There's you don't know what it is until the live bullets are flying. And then it's also how important a quarterback is to a program, right? I mean, Clayton Tune throws 4 interceptions in that opening week loss to Texas Tech. He only threw 6 more.
Yeah.
In the next 12, 13 games, right? Mm-hmm. And so him kind of figuring that out and valuing the football is really what turned Houston's program around. Because when you're throwing that many interceptions, you can't win on a consistent basis.
Yeah, he grew, I think, in a big way.
Probably the most improved player in the state.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. All right, so let's hand out some grades. Let's start with the offense. What kind of grade are we giving the Houston offense in 2021?
I think they were excellent. I think the only weak spot was probably the offensive line. They didn't average, more than 4 yards a carry. They gave up some sacks. But Clayton Tune, over 3,000 yards. Tank Dell, their wide receiver, 90 catches, 12 touchdowns. Alton McCaskill emerged as kind of a running back of the future. He set a school record with 19 total touchdowns. So offensively, and that's where Dana Holgerson's bread is buttered, right? Like we all consider him an offensive genius, and they really, really played well on that side of the football. So I'd give them an A. The offensive line needs to improve a little bit, but other than that, they were about as good as you could ask for.
Dell was probably, like you're talking about, some of the most underappreciated, underrated players, and not just in the state, but in the nation too. I mean, this guy was unbelievable, and for a program that has not always had like a true number one receiver, they've a lot of times when you take a look at great Houston teams of the past, they've been like a bunch of really good players, but like I hate to say like a bunch of number 2 receivers, but a bunch of number 2 receivers, right? A bunch of guys. Tank Dell stepped up and was like, "Nope, I'm the guy. It's me. You can throw me the ball whenever you want, and I'll make something happen." He was supremely impressive.
He had 53 more catches than anybody else on the roster.
Jeez,
golly.
I mean,
and that's what's funny is at the receiver spot and at like basically like outside receiver. You know what I mean? Like they moved him around, but like to line him up at the outside. If you were talking about a guy who was going to have that many more catches, you'd normally be talking about, okay, they're going to dink and dunk. They're doing a lot of tight ends, maybe tight end, maybe a slot receiver. No, I mean, he was their big play threat. He was their short play threat. Like, he was their everything threat on the outside. He was very impressive. All right, on the defensive side, I think I agree with you. I might go a little bit more A- on that, but I think we're picking nits there. On the defensive side, where are you going?
Yeah, I went with B+ defensively just because the secondary struggled a little bit down the stretch to stop big plays. But, they had 45 sacks as a team. 15 different players recorded a sack for Houston. They had 100 tackles for loss.
Yeah,
I mean that's insane over 14 games. So a really good effort by that front seven. The back end was good enough. Owens at safety is one of the top safeties in the state. Marcus Jones, as we mentioned, 5 interceptions at cornerback. So they didn't always stop teams, but in modern football, yards against probably isn't the greatest measurement. It's about points, and what they did really well was stop teams in the red zone. Like, opponents only had 15 touchdowns out of 34 trips into the red zone.
Yeah.
So that's how you want to play bend but don't break defense, and they were able to come up with enough turnovers, enough sacks, and enough stops in the red zone to give that high-powered offense a chance every single game.
Would it surprise you to learn that Houston was 6th nationally in total defense?
No, not at all. They were outstanding. I mean, I don't think Belk gets enough credit for what he's done. Houston keeping him at defensive coordinator in the offseason was probably the biggest recruiting win of that program, right? Because that defense is really, really good under his direction.
And what's so interesting is to go back to whenever the Kevin Sumlin Houston teams were really cooking, or whenever they would have whenever the Tom Herman went and when they won the Peach Bowl and stuff. It kind of does follow a similar pattern, which is normally outstanding secondary, super big time playmakers in the secondary. That's where they make plays. Front seven does their job, right? Even with Ed Oliver, that was kind of the case. It was secondary was the star, front seven does their job. This is kind of the reverse of the front seven took center stage, and they were the dominant force on that defense. The secondary was good. It was good enough, as you said, but they kind of flipped that script, and I think it was impressive, especially against a conference that has a lot of high-powered offenses. I mean, they didn't mosey through some sort of soft schedule. They went through a tough schedule. They faced high-powered offenses, and they came away for the most part. Look, Cincinnati got theirs, right? A few other teams got theirs, but at the end of the day, when you take a look at the whole, you can say they faced really good offenses, and for the most part, they held up really well.
Yeah, I mean, that Cincinnati game where they ended up kind of getting blown out, it was 14-14 at halftime.
Yeah.
So I mean, they were able to hang in there. I was just super impressed with how they can get pressure, because sacks are almost as good as turnovers, right? They force punts. If you're 2nd and 10, you're passing the ball, and now all of a sudden it's 3rd and 17. That's a punt, right? That's stealing a possession. So 45 sacks, 100 tackles for loss, a bunch of interceptions, a bunch of forced fumbles. Just a really good effort by Coach Belk's defense.
So let's hand out an MVP award. Who is your MVP of this team? You've probably got few different places you could look.
Yeah, I was going to go with somebody offensive, but they all kind of play off each other, right? Like Toon, McCaskill, Dell, they could have been the offensive MVP, but they're together. I went with Marcus Jones because of the amount of impact he had in multiple spots. Not only does he have 5 interceptions, which was tied for the league or lead in the nation, he had 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns, including a 100-yarder with 18 seconds left against SMU. And that, we kind of look at those two teams. That was the junction point.
Yep.
Right? Like that kickoff return, SMU started going down. They finished 1-4 in the season. Houston rides that momentum to an AAC championship game berth. So he also had 2 punt returns. So when you score 4 special teams touchdowns and you're getting 5 interceptions, to me it's hard to not consider you the team MVP.
Those are 9 game-changing plays. And basically, aside from being a quarterback where you have the ball in your hands that many times, it's going to be hard to find somebody who had that type of impact from a let's call it what it is, like a non-showcase position, right? Not running back, not receiver, not quarterback, to have 9 game-changing plays, minimum, I think is impressive. I think Marcus Jones is the right play. I think he was the star of the show, and I think he was the guy that whenever they needed the big play, he had that knack for it. So I think that's a good choice. Clayton Toon, Alden McCaskill, a few other guys, Dell are certainly in that mix, but he would be my pick as well. All right, so let's flash forward now to 2022, because what have you done for us lately? They haven't won a game in months.
A month.
A month. I'm sorry.
One
month.
singular
Weeks.
month.
They haven't won a game in weeks.
Yeah, they beat Auburn.
What are the expectations now for 2022? Because I think that going into 2021, we were talking about how it was a really make-or-break year for Dana Holgorsen. They had to show something. Obviously, they did. The target's only going to get bigger. We're going to see when they go to the Big 12. It probably won't be in 2022, but as far as your, on January 20th, put you on the spot. What are your expectations for Houston heading into 2022?
I think they're the best G5 team in the nation. That should be the expectation. It's AAC title championship or bust. I mean, they already went to the championship game, and they returned Toon, they returned Dell, they returned McCaskill, they returned Patrick Paul, their best offensive lineman. All those defensive guys we mentioned, they returned most of those guys. Marcus Jones is going to be the biggest departure, and so they're going to have to figure out that. But Cincinnati's losing almost everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think Cincinnati, they're going to be really good, right? Because when you're that good, you're recruiting well. Luke Fickell's an excellent coach. But I do think Houston walks into 2022, ranked in the top 20 in preseason polls and should be the odds-on favorite to win the AAC and maybe make a push in the way that Cincinnati did this year.
Yeah, and you want to talk about, by the way they start their season. They open at UTSA and they open at Tech, back-to-back weeks, and then they play Kansas and then they play Rice. Right. On one hand, you can look at that and you can say, all 4 of those games, you should win in a lot of ways.
They'll
right?
be favored.
They'll be favored, I think, in every one of those games. Going to Tech will be interesting, but I think you're going to be favored. You could go into AAC play with 2 Power 5 wins, including 1 road win. Right? 2 wins over your future Big 12 bunkmates, a win over the team that everybody's talking about in UTSA, and then you win the Bayou Bucket against Rice. You go in there and you start if they start 4-0, the hype train's not going to slow down for this team. I think that this is going to be one of those teams that I can see it right now. 6 months in the future, this is going to be one of those sexy teams, like nationally, that people are like, oh man, like, yeah, you guys are talking a lot about Coastal Carolina and stuff like that. Let's talk about the Houston Cougars. This is a team that I think could challenge. Let's be honest. There's probably not going to be, the AAC hasn't put out their schedule yet, but there's probably not going to be a game on the schedule that's not winnable.
Yeah, I mean, Cincinnati is the only team that in that conference that can compete talent-wise with Houston. I'll say this: I don't. There's not a team I feel better about going into 2022 in the state than Houston.
Wow.
I mean, UTSA loses Sincere McCormick and that kind of stuff. Baylor loses Jalen Petrie, Terrell Bernard, and a lot of players on that defense. Texas A&M, we still don't know what the quarterback and wide receiver position looks like. Houston is the known commodity in this state. Like they were already 11-1 in the regular season, and 1/2 of football away from winning an AAC championship. And all the dudes, or at least 80% of the dudes who contributed to that, are still in that locker room, and they're only should be getting better, right? Another year should only, birthdays are the most important thing in college football. And so I'd imagine that Clayton Tune should look even better. Yep. Alton McCaskill was just a true freshman.
Yeah.
He's going to be even better. That offensive line has to improve. And so if they can find a second wide receiver, if they can find somebody opposite of Tank Dell, and that's probably going to be Jeremy Singleton. If Singleton can step up and that secondary can figure out a way to replace Marcus Jones, honestly, I think Houston could be really in a running for an undefeated season and like a top 10 ranking, and in that conversation of, do we put a G5 team in the playoff?
He's Mike Craven. He's the college football insider for Dave Campbell's Texas Football. You can find his fine work at texasfootball.com and listen to the Republic of Football wherever you get podcasts. If you're listening to this podcast, you can find that podcast on the same platform. So search Republic of Football. Craven, appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely.
There he goes. Bye, Mike.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you would like more and to be notified when they come out, go ahead and click that subscribe button right down there. You can also watch Texas Football Today every day live at noon on texasfootball.com, Facebook, Twitch, and right here on YouTube. For more of the best coverage of Texas football in the Lone Star State, go to texasfootball.com/subscribe.